There's a month left until the early screening of the final episode of the amazing Digital Circus, and like I said before, the list of countries is gradually expanding, and that's honestly great to see. Right now, the conversation around Digital Circus has kind of slowed down. However, as soon as any new info starts popping up, you'll be the first to know. I know some spoilers have come out, but I'm not going to talk about them out of respect for you. Today, I want to wrap up all the key events, leaks, and theories around Episode 9, so we're fully ready for the long-awaited finale release. I've put together everything that matters and everything that's relevant, so this video is longer than usual. Feel free to just throw this on in the background, and with that, let's get started. The teaser that Glitch dropped after the release of Episode 8 shows us the first minutes of Episode 9. We can see the characters have moved closer to the center of the Digital Circus tent and are very carefully trying to assess the scale of the situation. And while all of them are trying to figure out together what happened and what comes next, Jax is just standing off to the side. He's looking down, his gaze is empty, and overall it's pretty expected considering what kind of character Jax actually is. He's insanely scared and confused and has no idea what he's supposed to do. So Jax picked the option that always worked for him. Just distance himself from the others and stay alone with his thoughts and feelings. In a situation like this, it feels like the dumbest move possible because it doesn't help anyone at all. It's way more logical to act like the other characters, stick together and try to solve the problem. However, aside from fear, there's at least one more feeling behind Jax's behavior at the start of Episode 9, hatred. Remember what he said during the cafe scene.
You know, things were just fine here until you and Zubul came along. Nothing? Okay.
Jax straight up blames Pomni and Zubul for being the reason behind all the problems in the Digital Circus. It even kind of makes sense because based on the past events in the circus and even the early episodes, you can tell they were living in conditions where Jax actually felt comfortable. He never wanted to leave the Digital Circus, at least cause of serious issues in the real world. We know Jax was a loser, and the Digital Circus was the only place that gave him at least some kind of enjoyment. He wanted this place to be a bit more fair, so he hated Kane for constantly lying, but he definitely didn't want to leave the circus. Now there's nothing left of the Digital Circus in the way Jax used to know it, and that uncertainty mixed with anger, sadness, and fear is exactly why, at least for the first half of Episode 9, we're going to see Jax alone. I feel like at the beginning of the final episode, we're going to get a scene where we hear the real Jax, the Jax who hates Pomni and Zubul for all of this, hates the others for constantly supporting this so-called rebellion, hates Kane for all the lies, and hates himself for what happened to Ribbit. However, it's important to understand that even though Jax is a weak character, he's definitely not an idiot. Jax is gradually going to come to terms with the fact that no matter how much he despises the others, or wants to stay in the previous version of the Digital Circus, there's no changing the current situation, which means the only option is to become a full part of the team. I'm sure that despite all the negativity coming from Jax in the first half of Episode 9, the other characters will be able to understand him and accept him. Maybe after all the honesty, after some heartfelt conversations, Jax will finally be able to drop that mask and become himself, and that will be a huge win, at least for him. In that same teaser, we can see Pomni standing in the center, and yeah, it's a small detail, but once again, it proves that she's going to be the main driving force in trying to find a solution to the problem and maybe even escape the Digital Circus. Pomni has a couple insanely important qualities that won't let the others lose faith in a better outcome. Pomni always takes on the role of a leader. She's not afraid to take responsibility for others. She's genuinely sincere with her emotions, and at the same time, Pomni cares a lot about literally every single character. Of course, the recent events are going to throw her into complete shock and panic at first, but she'll be able to snap back to her usual state pretty quickly. We've known for a while that Pomni intuitively understands how the Digital Circus works, things some couldn't figure out for years, she learned on her very first day. If you remember what Kinger said, then we understand that every character can create literally anything inside the system, and since Pomni has mastered this skill perfectly, I feel like she's going to try to teach the others to do something similar. Of course, this won't really move them closer to finding a way out, but in that case, the characters will at least be able to create conditions where they can feel somewhat comfortable in the Digital Circus. You gotta admit, coming up with anything when everything around you is partially destroyed is gonna be pretty hard. Thanks to her abilities and personality, Pomni will once again show herself as a leader and lead the others forward. The problem is, she barely knows anything about Kane, about the Digital Circus, and about C&A, and that's where Kinger is going to play an important role.
I think I accidentally killed Kane.
At first glance, it might seem like Kinger is to blame for all of this, since he was the one who failed his task. But if you dive a bit deeper into the code, it becomes clear that Kinger really isn't at fault here, and we already talked about this in one of the previous videos. Kinger will be able to calmly explain everything, and I'm sure that won't be any kind of problem. What actually matters here is something else. Pay attention to the fact that Kinger is acting completely normal. Right now, the digital circus is basically a dark space where Kinger feels comfortable and is able to control his thoughts, words, and actions. That's a huge plus for everyone else because he really does know way more about the digital circus than the others, and it feels like what he shared in the cafe was just a small part of what this character is going to reveal. Kinger knows the foundation of the code, knows how Kane works, knows where C and A might have left clues to an exit. He just needs a bit more time to remember all of it. Kinger is going to take on several important roles at once. He'll be the main kind of tool for finding a solution to the problem and a potential way out, and he'll also be the psychologist who can calm literally anyone down even in the most stressful situation. As sad as it sounds, these three characters are going to play the most important role in the final episode, while Regatha, Zubul, and Gangle and everything happening around them will unfortunately be a bit in the background. That doesn't mean they're not important or just there to fill the story. Not at all, but I feel like the show creators are going to put less focus on them than on Jax, Pomni, and Kinger. I absolutely love these characters, and there's a video coming soon where I'll break them down in detail and talk about what's going to happen to them. But today, let's quickly go over them in the context of episode 9. For a long time, Regatha seemed like a character with no serious issues, who's always positive. But the more we learned about her past, the more it became clear that her obsession with being important to someone comes from her real life. In episode 8, Regatha and Pomni have a great relationship, and I'm sure that's going to continue in episode 9 no matter what. Regatha is also going to support her friend in everything and won't doubt her decisions for a second. We're also going to get a more detailed look at her relationship with Kinger. He was the one who helped Regatha stay stable all this time, and that's exactly why she always speaks about him in a positive way. We also shouldn't forget that Regatha has always tried to keep things calm in the digital circus, and that trend is going to continue in the next episode in case of any conflicts, and as we already figured out, there are definitely going to be some. Zubul is the most straightforward character in the digital circus, and her desire to escape is even stronger than Pomni's. We're going to see Zubul as someone who's ready to do whatever it takes to reach her goal. Even though she looks upset, that's only temporary, and after that we'll be seeing the Zubul we're used to. Gangle is probably the most underrated character in the digital circus. She doesn't get as much screen time as the others, and because of that, it's really hard to say what might happen to her. Most likely she'll just be following her real friend everywhere and trying to help the others escape the digital circus. First, let's talk about Jax's mental state in the final episode. It will consist of 3 stages, and the first one is anger turning into depression. Over the last 3 episodes, Jax has gradually been revealed to us as the most depressed character. Behind the mask of a sarcastic fun guy, there's actually a fragile personality that can't accept the reality of the digital circus. He built himself a made-up world where he felt good, however, once the events started going outside of his usual worldview, everything started falling apart. Constant fear and ongoing panic attacks, the inability to accept help and support from others, all of this creates that big cocktail of internal issues. After the release of episode 8, we were shown a teaser where Jax is staring at the floor with a blank stare, separated from everyone else. Even back then, you could assume that Jax would completely cut off all ties with the other characters. After watching the trailer, we were convinced that the first minutes after what happened will be pretty strange for Jax. He doesn't understand what's going on, and after that, he starts actively showing his aggression. The problem is that none of this is going to help either Jax or the others, and the rabbit himself understands that perfectly well. Because of his weak character, he has no choice but to fully sink into his own issues. In the first half of episode 9, Jax's depression will gradually get worse and turn into the second stage, madness. Several scenes from the trailer show us Jax from a very unusual side. His stare and behavior actually create a really unsettling feeling. An empty and insane stare, a forced smile, strange movements, all of this is the result of a severe depressive state combined with negative external factors. Jax's inability to accept help might become the key issue for this character, which will lead to the third stage, destabilization. The trailer shows that in this state, the characters will stay for a long time, which means all the previous stages of Jax's mental breakdown can actually lead to destabilization. In that case, Jax's personality will gradually start to fall apart, so to speak. None of his actions will have any rational explanation, and he'll completely lose control over himself and his mind. We've already seen all of this in Kaufmo's case, who also went from a fake cheerful guy to a completely broken personality. His room is a perfect reflection of the destabilization stage he went through, and this image directly references the scene with Jax. We see a very similar environment around the characters, but while Kaufmo is facing his abstracted version, Jax is turned away. It's obvious that this is just a vision and not some actual location with an abstracted monster inside. We already talked about how abstraction is a programmed process that doesn't depend on Kane. Even though Kane can quickly find a glitch in the code while it's still fixable, he can't fully fix a character once they've reached the terminal stage, which means this process can easily still happen even with Kane deleted. Also, I was really intrigued by this scene from the trailer where Pomni walks into Jax's room and then says his name in a scared and uncertain voice. Obviously, she saw something horrible, however, it's unlikely that it will be abstraction. At this point, I'm sure that none of the current cast will turn into that creature in the Digital Circus finale. However, if in Kaufmo's case he actually became a monster, Jax might have a completely different outcome. I've already suggested a theory that because of a breakdown in his code, Jax might enter a state of what you could call a permanent hallucination, where his life feels just as joyful as it used to. In that case, this scene with Ribbit might not be a pleasant memory, but rather something that's happening inside Jax's head right now. Any interesting the amazing Digital Circus concepts or ideas that ended up being cut? Regatha was originally going to be subject to a lot more violence, and she was going to have plush organs. We can see a reference to that answer in one of the older concept arts where Regatha actually has plush organs. However, the fact that Regatha was supposed to go through even more violence is honestly surprising because it already feels like she suffers more than anyone else in the Digital Circus, at least when it comes to external factors. What's your message to the fandom before episode 9 hits? This one's a bit heavy, so be ready for that. Here, Goose once again hints that the finale of the Digital Circus is going to be way more tragic than a lot of people expect. Remember that same The Other Choice. Maybe with this answer, Gooseworks is hinting that several characters in one of the scenes of episode 9 will have to make a choice that will determine the future of all the circus residents. And judging by everything, that choice won't be easy at all, and they might have to choose between something terrible and something insanely terrible. From one to woke. How woke is Jax? That's a really complicated and nuanced question. Honestly, I don't even know what to add here, but I'd be really interested to hear your answer to this question. Send a meme that perfectly pictures you after episode 9. Goose responded with a pretty funny image. It's a scene from Smiling Friends where we see Glep and kids messing with him. Gooseworks associates herself with Glep. She's basically overwhelmed by everything related to the Digital Circus, while the kids represent fans who keep asking about the Digital Circus whenever they get the chance, trying to figure out what's going to happen next, and when something doesn't go their way, they start real drama, like what happened before the release of episode 5. Of course, this isn't about all fans, since most people were just following updates and quietly waiting for each new episode, but that insane popularity and constant pressure from the audience is what, in my opinion, made Goose genuinely tired of the Digital Circus. What do you personally think all the characters' names would be in the real world? All I've heard is Regatha would be Egatha and Jax is Jack, but I think those are very basic. I've known their real names from the beginning. Some people have figured out Kinger's real name. I think I've only seen one person guess Pomni's name. I think I saw someone guess Zubal's name for the wrong character, and I've seen one person guess Regatha's name, but that's all so far. This is one of the most interesting answers cause it reveals several details at once. Even though Goose didn't confirm it directly, she clearly hinted that Grant is actually Kinger's real name, while at some point someone had guessed the characters' names. But apparently it didn't really spread because a lot of people probably saw it as just another wrong theory. This answer also finally puts an end to the credibility of that so-called leak. Unfortunately, it's fake. How do you feel about people leaking frames or parts of episodes of the amazing Digital Circus? Nobody's ever leaked anything real except for me, so I don't care. Honestly, this is pretty obvious because all those shocking leaks people tried to pass off as the original were seen as fake by fans from the start. But there's another point here that matters more. It's clear that before episode 9 drops, we're going to see a lot more leaks being discussed in the Digital Circus community. Some of them will look pretty believable, like this one for example, but now we know for sure that the next wave of leaks won't have anything to do with the final episode. Looking back on the show, what are you most proud of? Every time I've hurt people. Considering how much of that we've seen throughout the 8 episodes, it's actually easy to believe Goose is proud of that. Now that we're near the end of the show's run, are there any TADC designs you would want to go back and change? I'd make Gummy Goo a little hotter. Even though this character is a side one, he still managed to stick in the hearts of pretty much every Digital Circus fan, and Goose herself has said many times that he's one of her favorite characters, so it's not surprising that she chose his design. What's your favorite outfit you've ever put the TADC characters in? I like putting Jax in dresses because I'm a bad person. Jax and his outfits have been a whole meme in the Digital Circus community for a while now, and honestly it feels like he can pull off literally anything. I'm just wondering if you wrote the commercials for the TADC merch. The last one I helped write was the Tropical Resort one. I didn't write any of the new ones. In case you forgot, Goose is talking about this video right here, and with that, let's keep going. Can we get ages of abstracted characters? Nah, you're all on your own for that shit. Since Gooseworks didn't give us any actual answer, let's do exactly what she suggested. I've been thinking for a while about making a video where I break down every abstracted character in as much detail as possible, and if that sounds interesting to you, let me know in the comments. Are the TADC ads canon to the show? The answer is as simple as it gets: no. We all remember a lot of so-called bonus content from Glitch during their merch videos. Now we know for sure that those events didn't actually happen in the digital circus, and that was kinda obvious, even though it seemed like that scene with Kinger and Queenie really reflected real events from the past. Even though it's not canon, I still believe Glitch could have hidden some references and hints in those videos, and since we already covered this topic on the channel, let's not get stuck on it. Is Bubble still alive? He was deleted with Kane. Here it's important to remember an older answer from Goose, where she said that Bubble is a much simpler AI created by Kane. Even though Bubble behaved like a virus, he's still Kane's creation, and once the admin was removed from the digital circus, this guy disappeared along with him. This also shuts down a lot of theories about Bubble being a system error, or that mysterious blue AI. Considering that Kane has like a 95% chance of not coming back, in the amazing digital circus, we most likely won't be seeing Bubble again either. What is Ragatha's horse's name? Chestnut, Butterscotch, and Alfredo. From the very beginning, the idea of escaping the digital circus was one of the core themes. Even though after the pilot there were a lot of episodes where the exit wasn't mentioned at all, fans still couldn't forget that one door we were shown back in October 2023. Episode 7 became a turning point because the idea of escape got back into Pomni's head and as a result spread to everyone else. But then this happened. It might seem like everything is obvious and there's no way out of the digital circus. However, that idea only got even more locked into the characters' minds, which is what led to the events of episode 8 where they tried to find another way to solve this problem. The idea of temporarily shutting down Kane led to catastrophic and possibly irreversible consequences. Kane disappeared, the digital circus turned into a dark and half-destroyed structure. Any wrong move can lead to a character ending up inside the void, and that's actually dangerous. In the pilot episode, we saw that once Pomni got there, her consciousness basically shut off, and only thanks to Kane she was able to come back. The void is actually a pretty interesting kind of system zone of the digital circus. To be more precise, the digital circus and absolutely all the territory around it, any world created by Kane, all of that is part of the void. In episode 8, Kinger told us that the digital circus wasn't something created by C&A. They were developing a creative AI, which we know as Kane, and were gradually feeding him certain knowledge, including things related to a circus. That's why once inside the system, Kane created the digital circus and everything around it himself, and that's exactly why it was partially destroyed right after Kane disappeared. It's important to understand that Kane didn't create this entire system, he was placed inside it. All of this leads us to the idea that absolutely no one can control what happens to the characters inside the void, and the only thing you can do is bring them back to a so-called safe zone where their consciousness can actually function. Going back to one of the scenes from episode 7, we remember this.
Kane is an AI.
Yeah, I think we all got that.
An AI specifically created to keep your minds active.
We see clear confirmation of this in that same scene from the pilot, and this is where things get really interesting. If one of Kane's roles was to preserve the lives and functionality of the characters, then after his disappearance, no one will be able to save them if they end up in the void. In that same pilot episode, we were shown how after wandering through the void for a long time, we end up in the exact room Pomni entered the digital circus from. This once again proves that the void isn't just some unused part of the digital circus that Kane hasn't explored yet, but a full system that no one can control. That's also what Kane's panic was about when he found out someone ended up inside the void. The system itself is at least 3 kilometers long, and we learned that by looking at the Wacky Watch, and now just imagine the characters finding out the truth about this place, and that if they make it all the way through, they can escape. Sounds pretty good until you realize the void isn't a straight line, but a 3-dimensional space, and even though Pomni was moving in a straight path here, no one knows how the system might react to a new object suddenly appearing. What if the system itself changes the trajectory of a character, and considering what we talked about earlier, we could end up with a character endlessly drifting through the void without even realizing it? This would have been an easy problem for Kane to solve, but his disappearance turned to entering the void from a minor inconvenience into a fatal mistake that can't be fixed anymore.
They began forcibly hooking my fellow co-workers up to the computer. in special stasis pods that would keep them alive and analyze their brains.
On one hand, everything here seems obvious. The characters' real bodies are in stasis pods, and if they somehow manage to leave the digital circus, they'll just return to their bodies and everything will be fine. However, there are a few details here that we just can't ignore. In episode 5, Pomni and Zubul made it clear that they ended up in the digital circus after finding a headset inside abandoned buildings. No one else talked about this, and it's logical to assume the others ended up in the digital circus directly through C and A. Considering that Pomni and Zubul were the last ones to end up inside the digital circus, we can assume that C and A no longer exists. At least not on the same scale as during the Scratch era. Maybe some of the scientists are still observing things, but just imagine how much money it would take to maintain all the stasis pods where the characters' bodies used to be kept. In that same episode 7, Jax revealed that all of them ended up in the digital circus because of a headset, and I feel like after the first successful consciousness transfers, C and A managed to upgrade the tech and fit everything into a compact device. They no longer needed massive machines to transfer consciousness, but they still had to store the still living bodies somewhere. Ragatha's initial reaction to the digital circus hints that everything was supposed to be fine at first, which again might suggest that she was in a C&A office where she was tricked into putting on the headset, and after that you already know what happened. Ragatha is trying to figure out where she is and calling out to someone, while Pomni has no idea what's going on at all. All of this was leading to the idea that originally the characters' real bodies were supposed to be inside stasis pods in a state of suspended animation. However, considering that even if someone from C&A is still continuing their work, they no longer have the resources to maintain devices like that, which means there's a high chance that the people who became these characters in the digital world are already dead in the real world. So this leads us to understand that right now the characters are truly trapped. There's no one left who can control the processes around them. Any wrong move or decision can lead to an early end. Returning to the real world is theoretically possible, but in practice it's almost impossible. Even if someone does manage to get out, there's nowhere to return to in the real world because the real person who later became a character is most likely already dead. If we take a look at the so-called teaser itself, we won't understand anything. Like this, it's clearly better. However, even after playing around with the settings, basically all we see is a destroyed dorm hallway. Everything is glitching. The paintings are damaged. In some places we see damage to the digital circus floor, but that's all we've got. We've just once again confirmed that the digital circus tent is in a really bad state right now. There's nothing shocking here, and this might hint that it's actually a real frame from the final episode, since fakes usually looked more so called epic. Despite all of this, I still can't be completely sure that it's real, and some kind of gut feeling is telling me that, unfortunately, this might be another fake, since aside from one Reddit user, no one else has seen it. I'd be happy to be wrong, but let's move on to the next topic. I'll keep this short, since recently there was news that at this point Glitch has made around $6 million from ticket pre-sales, and the leader here is Mexico, whose residents have spent around $1 million on tickets. Everyone remembers this poster and those same eyes that we don't really know who they belong to, Kane or abstracted monsters. In one of the recent posters, this question was finally answered, and we clearly saw the same kind of eyes as Kaufmo or Queenie had. Even after removing Kane, nothing happened to these creatures, and a bit later in the video, I'll explain why. So there's a huge chance that because of the cracks inside the digital circus, some of the abstracted monsters might make their way outside, and that's going to be really fun for the characters. Also on this poster, we see a new pose from Jax, and considering that every time we're shown something new specifically connected to this character, I'm more and more convinced that he's going to play the main role in the Digital Circus finale. After an even deeper analysis of everything going on with Digital Circus right now, I'd like to talk with you about what we should pay the most attention to in the new episode. The first scenes are basically just a reflection of the reality the characters are going to be living in for a while, and it's pretty much a direct continuation of episode 8. Then we're shown Gangle and Zubul. This scene is one of the best examples of just how much things have changed in the digital circus because it's essentially a reference to that scene from episode 6. If back then it was a heartfelt conversation with a happy ending, now there's no way this is going to end well. They're not going to argue or yell at each other, but those smiles are definitely gone. A similar situation is shown in this shot, which instantly takes us back to episode 7 where the characters were full of determination and confidence. Now even the slightest attempt to regroup and figure out what to do next just doesn't work at all. Remember how I said that Pomni is the one who always pushed the idea of escaping the system? In the end, that initiative backfired on her, and for the first time, we're seeing Pomni completely lost. She doesn't have even the slightest idea what to do next, and all she can do is try to justify herself. Pay attention to Kinger. We usually see him either as a complete lunatic or as a very wise character. But in the trailer, we see that Kinger, just like everyone else, is completely drained and doesn't have even the slightest idea how to fix the situation. We can see dark lines around his eyes, which once again shows just how scared Kinger is right now. The rest of the scenes only push us deeper into that feeling of hopelessness, and the key moments here are obviously the scene with Pomni crying and the return of Gangel's old mask. Pomni's tears are a turning point in the story of the digital circus, showing how even the bravest and most determined characters can't handle the system and end up giving up, accepting the rules of the game. We also see that same mask from episode 4. If you remember, that episode was a turning point after which Gangel started trying not to rely on her masks and to always be herself, and she was actually doing pretty well. By putting that mask back on, Gangel is returning herself to a state where she was completely dependent on her emotions and couldn't control herself at all. I also noticed that this scene looks really similar to Jax's panic attacks, and it's very possible that in the final episode, we'll see Gangel have a panic attack for the first time. We'll talk about Jax a bit later, but for now, let's sum things up. Based on what we've seen, it's clear just how tragic episode 9 is going to be, at least in terms of relationships and the character's mental state. They're all drained, they don't see any way out, and most likely they're actually ready to give up and accept this new reality. I've seen theories saying there's no exit anymore because Kane is gone. I'll say it straight up, that's nonsense, so don't believe stuff like that. The exit is built into the system's code. You can get out of any system, and the most important thing is figuring out how. Kane is just as much a part of the system as the exit itself, which means that Kane disappearing, or even the entire digital circus disappearing, doesn't mean the exit from the system that the circus exists in is gone. The same goes for abstraction. Kane isn't responsible for characters turning into abstracted monsters. It's a glitch in each character's code, and that's also built into the system itself. Kane was just able to quickly detect that glitch and fix it, which is why he could prevent it so easily. If we look at this scene, we can notice how quickly the sky above the digital circus is changing. Unfortunately, this shows that the characters aren't doing anything at all to fix their situation. They've just accepted this new reality. Ribbit most likely entered the digital circus back in 2010 and was one of many characters who eventually turned into abstracted monsters. We also know that this tragic event didn't happen that long ago, cause Goose revealed that Ribbit abstracted before Kaufmo. We also know for sure that Zubul replaced Ribbit. Pay attention to Zubul's behavior in the pilot episode and, for example, in episode 8. These are basically two completely different versions of the character when it comes to how she treats others. Zubul isn't actually as rude as she might have seemed at first, and she just needed a bit more time to adjust to the digital circus, which once again proves that Zubul hasn't been there for that long, and that most likely means Ribbit abstracted not long before Pomni showed up. We need this to understand that Jax still hasn't fully come to terms with losing his best friend, and even though this was clearly shown in episode 7, I decided to expand on this theory a bit so it's easier to follow everything that's going to be said next. The first mention of Ribbit happened in episode 5 during stargazing. Already at this point, we understood just how important this character was for Jax. Keep in mind that Gooseworks directly confirmed that Jax is one of the main characters in the digital circus. At first, everyone thought this adventure was created by Kinger. However, after seeing the scene with Ribbit in the final episode trailer, now I'm sure this adventure was actually a tribute to Ribbit. That's exactly why we got to see such a calm and genuinely sincere Jax. We've only seen him like that a few times, and that's important to understand. All of his sincerity was directed exclusively toward Pomni, and I'm sure that was intentional, cause Jax saw something in Pomni that reminded him of Ribbit. Now we get to episode 7, where the topic of Ribbit was explored even further. First, we were shown Jax's hallucination. It's important to pay attention to two details. The first one is, of course, the stars. Absolutely everything that's connected to Ribbit in any way ends up being reflected through the stars, and this is going to be very important a bit later. The second detail is their photo together, where we can see Jax, Kaufmo, and Ribbit. You can also notice a mug of hot chocolate, which directly leads us to the next scene. Here we hear a few lines from Ribbit, and to this day, there's still no clear transcription of what was actually said. However, the most likely version is this.
Hey,
Most likely there was some kind of serious conflict between Jax and Ribbit that became the breaking point in their relationship. I'm not saying Ribbit abstracted right after that, but it most likely happened not long after, especially considering how strongly Jax still reacts to that same mug. So far, there haven't been any hints from the show creators about what actually happened to Ribbit. However, if we put together the fact that Ribbit is a girl, that she and Pomni share some similarities, and also the fact that Jax chose Pomni during his most important adventure, it might suggest that to understand what happened between them, we need to look at the dynamic between Pomni and Jax. We already talked about this theory on the channel, so I'll keep it as brief as possible. The main thing to understand is Jax's worldview, which is based on character archetyping. Even back then, it was obvious that Jax was wrong, and this is basically the key mistake that led to his biggest loss during his time in the digital circus. However, even though Jax claimed it was all just an illusion, because of the similarities between Pomni and Ribbit, he genuinely wanted to protect Pomni and keep her as safe as possible so that the same thing that happened to his closest friend wouldn't happen to her. At this point, we can assume that Jax tried to push the same kind of mindset onto Ribbit so they could survive in the digital circus for as long as possible. If we remember those random comments from Ashley Nichols about Ribbit, we can tell this is a character fans are gonna love. Most likely she was just like Pomni, cheerful, kind, and genuinely friendly, and all that archetype nonsense was only getting in the way of her living normally. That mismatch between reality and the lifestyle Jax forced onto her slowly destroyed Ribbit over time, and with each year it only got harder and harder for her. The moment she tried to be herself, Jax could turn aggressive toward her, and it's very possible that this happened during the snow adventure, and that's why Ribbit might have said, "You've become different. You think I don't care about us?" At first, Jax was kind to her, but the more so-called character he witnessed, the more pressure he started putting on Ribbit about sticking to her archetype in order to survive. All of this eventually led to Ribbit's abstraction, and Jax still can't forgive himself for it. Every time he tries to make new friends, it ends up with him putting on that same persona again, and that's where it starts getting really dangerous. Now that we've gone through all of that, let's finally talk about that scene from the trailer.
Have you ever done something that you regret?
Here, we're seeing a dialogue between Ribbit and Jax, and the events are taking place inside Ribbit's room. We know that each character's room is created automatically based on their appearance. Very simplified. Ribbit is green, the glow is green, everything here is pretty obvious. We can notice something like a lamp that the glow is coming from, and also just as a small detail, I noticed a kind of strange positioning of the stars in this area, which most likely is connected to the interior of Ribbit's room. It's important to understand that Jax himself doesn't really care about stars, but they were an extremely important and meaningful part of Ribbit's life, and that's exactly why Jax started to value them just as much as his friend did. Most likely, Ribbit was the first person who truly understood Jax, and this is just one of many genuine conversations between Jax and Ribbit. She was the only one Jax could actually be himself with. The star scene wasn't chosen randomly. It once again highlights that Jax really did try to build something similar with Pomni, but because of his own internal fears and his strong attachment to Ribbit, he couldn't let go of all that or replace his best friend with someone new. Right now, things in the digital circus couldn't be worse, and Jax clearly understands that nothing like that will ever happen again, and it's very possible that this scene might serve as some kind of farewell for Jax. The memories of how good things were with Ribbit, and the realization that it's never coming back, combined with the real fear of returning to the real world, will ultimately lead Jax to the same fate as his other close friend. So Ribbit really could end up being the reason why, at least for Jax, Episode 9 will be the first episode with a truly tragic ending. The YouTuber PlaneRock did something that made everyone talk only about him.
Yo, it's my what's up? Bye.
Before we keep going, a quick disclaimer. Since YouTube's rules right now are actually really strict, I'm gonna bleep out some words, but from the overall context, you'll still get everything. The use of a word shortened from the word negative in PlaneRock's mind was taken as a reference to a situation that happened in 2019, but we'll get into that a bit later. It's pretty likely that if PlaneRock hadn't consciously decided to post this video on Twitter, there wouldn't be any massive drama right now. However, as soon as he did it, a ton of justified hate immediately came crashing down on him, and since a lot of people were calling on Glitch to do something, they responded to this situation like this. We were made aware of horrific and hateful behavior from a specific individual around our Glitch booth today, and we have contacted Level Up staff to take action and have them removed and permanently banned. We have also told our staff not to serve him, others featured in that video, or anyone seen exhibiting any behavior that would make members of our community feel unsafe or unwanted. These idiots are not representative of our community and fans, and we want to make any glitch event as safe as possible for all. We condemn absolutely any hateful, discriminatory, or dumb behavior. Be kind to each other, and if you can't then piss off, we don't want you here. For probably the first time, Glitch spoke out this firmly, and it's totally understandable. Usually big companies put out statements like this in a more polished and serious way. However, in this situation, you can understand Glitch since this kind of behavior from a pretty well-known YouTuber really does hurt the brand's image. I think it seems logical to everyone that if Plain Rock had admitted he was wrong and apologized, everything would have been fine. However, instead, he started fueling this whole thing. Against the backdrop of growing discussion and backlash among Digital Circus fans, Gooseworks made a post where she wrote, "I feel like I should say if you think you're on my side by saying genuine racist, hateful things to black people in the fandom, then it is my personal belief that you should shoot yourself in the head with a gun." It all seems pretty clear. The show creators called out the inappropriate behavior and took the necessary action. However, that's only the tip of the iceberg of why this new drama even started. Cause, like I already said, the whole issue goes back to the events of 2019, but we'll get into that as soon as we wrap up the part of the video about the current situation. Plain Rock apparently found a way to boost his reach, which can very easily be turned into real money. I'm not even talking about an apology, but even just forgetting about this situation or not commenting on it at all would have been more or less enough. However, Plain Rock chose a different path. He's doing everything he can to push this topic as much as possible, constantly posting different photos from Level Up Expo and captioning them like this. Good thing I didn't do this, only gave the purple cartoon rabbit a cool nickname. I would hope they're talking about someone else, otherwise anyone falsely accused with this horrific and violent rhetoric would feel unsafe. Yes, I was able to tap in with my free creator badge tied to my username I got on day 1. They didn't even care to disable it, or couldn't. I now understand why Glitch and Gooseworks have to put out these statements phrased to the extreme. Their fan base is so rabid that even though they both showed absolutely no subtlety to condemn me and other people, a lot of their fans still say it's not enough or bring up other old controversies they want them to address and apologize for. Never-ending cycle. Makes me feel barely any regret with how I've conducted myself all these years with what I've said or done, so all the annoying people left and I've never had to grovel to apologize for dumb reasons, especially for small stuff that happened years ago. Even if my audience is dwindling, I would much rather have that than what they have to deal with. What good is unlimited money if it just brings you more problems? If I were them, I would just retire at this point for a happier ending. Thank you to those who choose to stay, and I will continue to make do however I please. Here Plain Rock did several things at once, tried to justify himself, said he doesn't regret anything, and also made a reference to that same situation from 7 years ago. And let's quickly go over what happened back then and why those events are used by some Digital Circus fans as a basis to accuse Glitch and Gooseworks of bias, and then we'll wrap up this whole drama with a final takeaway. Back in 2019, during a stream for Ashley Nichols' birthday, a user with that username wrote some message which ended up leading to this.
Notice you, Senpai. Aaron, sure, we notice you. Chur. Hey, Saber.
Saber, what's up?
Saber, my man.
Oh.
Wait, what? 5'7"? He was the same height as me?
She did not. It just sounded like it.
Did it? I said, you idiot.
It sounded like another word.
No.
About 10 minutes later, a phrase with a word shortened from the word negative showed up on a t-shirt, and it caused a pretty strong reaction from the people on the stream. For more than 7 years, nobody even brought this up, and basically no one paid attention to it at the time. It was pretty much just a short, lived inside joke among the voice actors. I'm sure everyone had already forgotten about it. However, as soon as this situation resurfaced, Digital Circus fans immediately started asking Michael Kovac and Ashley Nichols what that even was, and they got a pretty quick response. This is absolutely an insensitive joke. Earlier in the stream, we heard Ashley read out a username that contained the word short for negative, and all of us, including chat, freaked out because we misheard what was said. Once the misunderstanding was cleared, we poked fun at the absurdity of it. However, the joke relies on the fact that it's teetering on racist, which ultimately is no different than making a legitimate racist joke. I apologize for any harm this has caused and for the fact that we ever thought it humorous to joke about in the first place. Racism is never okay, and we should always strive to be kind and lift each other up. After that, Michael reposted Glitch's post first and then Gooseworks' post, once again emphasizing that he was in the wrong, even though that whole situation didn't carry any negative intent. Michael chose the best possible way to calm things down, and pretty much everyone took his side. Ashley also spoke out about those events. I want to apologize to anyone the jokes in my stream harmed. Racism is never okay, and even joking about a misunderstanding that sounded racist is also not okay. I should have known better back then, and I want to continue to grow and be a better person. Seems like the situation got resolved successfully, and no one's really talking about the voice actors in a negative way anymore. But besides them, Gooseworks was also on that same stream as a viewer, and she left this kind of comment. Basically, the situation with Gooseworks is the same as with the others. These were events from 7 years ago, and on top of that, it was presented as a local joke that everyone quickly forgot about. However, this and some other situations became a reason for some fans to start asking Gooseworks why she condemned Plain Rock's behavior but didn't say a word about her friends or anyone else. The same goes for Glitch. The difference here is that in the 2019 situation, there were no intentional actions, while Plain Rock, after the apologies from Michael and Ashley, decided to say it on purpose, boosting his reach in the process. I don't think he had the goal of offending anyone. Most likely, Plain Rock saw it as a joke thinking everyone would support him, but he didn't take into account that with this kind of behavior, he's putting not only the voice actors or the show creators in a bad spot, but also the entire reasonable part of the digital circus fandom.